completely different. I'm going to talk about business models today. TAIR, come on. Okay. Hold on. Let's see if this works. The first thing I want to talk about is what a research database goes through in terms of its life cycle from start to finish. And we've heard bits and pieces of this today. This is the whole scenario. And as technical lead at TAIR, I've been working on this for the last 8 years, and I've gone through basically the whole cycle except for the initial grant funding. I wasn't there at the time, but TAIR was funded initially back in around 1999 by the NSF. And basically, once you get your initial grant funding, you can go in various directions. You can get additional rounds of grant funding, which is what we did. So we got 3 5-year grants in total. Or you can not, and you can just sit there on the web, gradually fading away. Or you can become a for-profit company and make no money with a resource that people sort of kind of use but don't really value. What this usually winds up in is discontinued, website no longer available, and data lost. And if you become a for-profit company, 2 things can happen. Either the data can get lost because the for-profit company realizes it's not that valuable, or it becomes simply unavailable to academic researchers who can't afford it. So, the only other alternative is to transfer it to another resource. This is sort of like the zombie database, where it goes from resource to resource gradually, changing its character over time with totally different staffs and totally different characteristics. So when TAIR's funding was ended by the NSF, we decided to take a hard look at this kind of life cycle because we didn't want the data to get lost and we didn't want it to become unavailable to academic researchers. We went through lots of different alternatives, but ultimately none of them really seemed that valuable until pretty much a couple of months before we were going to all sort of get laid off. So what we decided was based on 2 things. First of all, TAIR's usage, and the usage of many of these databases, is international in character. It is not a United States database, it's not a European database for the most part. In our case, about 23% is United States, 17% is China, 8% is Japan, etc. We've got a lot in Canada and Europe, South Korea, etc. So by focusing on funding in the United States, we were kind of missing a bet, we felt. This made it fairly obvious that we needed to look for international funding, and so we started talking to the Chinese, and that worked really well for a while, but the funding never really materialized. So the second thing we looked at was our usage. And with a usage curve like this, there's really no reason to abandon the resource. This is kind of like the galaxy usage graph, I think. It's clear that people value the resource and that they increasingly use it. Why the NSF decided to abandon funding, that's something only they can tell you. What we decided to do was basically take advantage of a user base of 25,000 registered individual researchers, 9,900 research labs, et cetera, to essentially crowdfund the whole database. And we had looked at this in the past, and the basic problem with this is nobody's willing to pay very much, okay? So basically each of these lines is a lab, and this is a price study showing what they would pay. There's another problem, however, which I also heard referred to a little bit, which is that what labs do, this is kind of the same thing as setting up 500 users and running multiple runs and that sort of thing. Basically what the labs said they would do is buy 1 or 2 subscriptions and then share them between all of the different researchers. It makes perfect sense, and it's perfectly legal and even possibly ethical. However, that's even less money available to us from the researchers. So, what we decided was that what we needed to do was come up with a pricing scheme that made it fair to everyone and to make it totally transparent so that everybody could actually see what they were paying for in the sense of the overall community. So, what we did, I guess it doesn't say it right here, but the most important thing we did is we formed a nonprofit corporation. So instead of forming a for-profit business, which would take over this database in the usual scenario, well, it's not that usual, but it's happened several times, what we wanted to do was go completely nonprofit, have an institution that was entirely devoted to this concept of a sustainable database being funded by the community over time. The result of that, and the result of our pricing studies, if the price is over about $95 a person, many labs won't subscribe because they can't afford it. That's per year. And we also discovered in talking with people that institution-wide subscriptions are preferred. By institution, I mean library, basically. Although it doesn't have to be a library. It can be any kind of not-for-profit institution. It can be a university as a whole. It can be a consortium of universities, anything like that. So what this institution-wide subscription does is it covers all of the faculty, staff, and students. It allows access based on the IP address. It provides access to just casual users. In fact, it seems to provide access to people wandering in off the street, as far as I can tell from the way most libraries work. And I'm not even going to talk about interlibrary loans. Think about it. And finally, it shifts the cost from grants to the university library budget, which the people getting the grants really like. Can't tell you why. But the problem with institution-wide subscriptions is that not every institution is going to be able to do it. So we couldn't just limit ourselves to institutional subscriptions. We have to have the concept of a lab subscription, and in fact, we also have to have the concept of an individual subscription in order to accommodate people who are kind of out of luck with respect to their institution or their lab. So, the technology behind this is basically a paywall technology. And if you're going to have a paywall technology, it has to be pretty flexible to accommodate all of these different pieces. So we're building just a very simple, straightforward proxy server paywall that allows us to take into account IP address based subscriptions, login password subscriptions, multiple individuals tracked. And we also built in the concept of metering in the paywall so that we can allow for free access to people who are only casual users, for example. So what this looks like in the bottom line, we have corporate subscriptions, that's for-profit companies at the 5,000 to 25,000 level. We've got institutional subscriptions with 4 tiers based on usage from $500 to $7,500. We've got lab subscriptions at $85, so you essentially get a 10% discount. And we've got individual subscriptions at $95. We also have free subscriptions for high school, college courses, and others, metered content, and we're making up the rest through crowdfunding, donations, foundation grants, subcontracts, everything but government grants. We don't really want to do government grants directly, so we're going to stick with subcontracting on those. So overall, what we're trying to do with this model is continue offering the resource, but to fund it through community participation, pretty much at the institutional level as much as possible, so that institutions are paying their way through this for the digital resources that we're offering. So what we're doing is we're moving the concept of the model organism database into the framework of a digital resource offered by a library. And we're trying hard to make that as transparent as possible in terms of the business model, in terms of how should I put it, the actual financial details of the organization and so on. So we're basically going to post our entire internal set of documents on the web whenever we file anything with the IRS or whenever we do anything that involves actual money, so that it's actually out there on the web and you can tell exactly where your money is going and what it's being used for. This puts us ahead of many nonprofit organizations on the web, as far as I can tell. But again, the idea is keep the subscription rates as low as possible, keep them totally transparent, and make them work for everybody as much as possible, and then deal with the people who really can't afford it in a transparent way as well. So I forgot to put this into the slide, but we're also planning on programs for third world countries and so on, which don't have organized institutions, basically to give them free subscriptions and that sort of thing as well. So that explains what we're trying to do in the immediate short term. However, as we were putting all of this stuff together and as we were talking to many, many people in various kinds of organism communities, what we realized is that this is not a problem that is going to be limited to TAIR and the Arabidopsis community. This is a problem that is going to be faced by any organization that has a persistent resource that depends on government grants, particularly in the United States, but certainly anywhere, really. So our vision at this point is basically a community using all of the relevant knowledge gained from previous research to accelerate scientific discovery. So what we're trying to do is promote a body of knowledge that is sustainable over time. And depending on grants is not, in fact, a sustainable business model. So we're hoping to prove that this business model really does work and can, in fact, provide the sustainability behind a scientific resource at the level of a system like TAIR with tens of thousands of users around the world. That it can do it in an international context, and that it can do it over a long period of time without depending on things like government grants. So in order to achieve this, whoops, let's see if I can back. So in order to achieve this, our mission is to develop an economically and technologically sustainable business model and platform that provides the resources to allow scientific databases to persist, grow, and prosper. That means, so the business model on one side, but a platform on the other side. So over the next 5 years, what we're going to be developing is a platform for multiple databases that can be offered using this business model in one form or another. That platform will provide a way for those databases to prosper rather than just sit there as a static resource. So the idea is to build resources that grow with time rather than just sit there being downloadable data on the internet. The second key part of the mission is to integrate data into the knowledge bases and develop tools that enable reuse and create knowledge from the data. So the other thing we'll be doing over the next 5 years is integrating other tools, possibly like Galaxy or other tools of that sort. A lot of the visualization tools that we just saw, those ideas I think could benefit our model as well. From my point of view as a tool developer, I think the tool set behind a website is almost as important as the data itself. They work together to provide knowledge. Just data versus just tools doesn't really work. If you have them together, it does provide a lot more value. And again, that works with the business model where you're actually charging people for using them. Finally, we want to build an interactive, computable learning environment where researchers explore relevant knowledge and build testable hypotheses. This means that not only are we going to be concentrating on tools and data, but we're going to be concentrating on education, we're going to be concentrating on providing all of the things that TAIR has provided for the last 50 years to generate a learning environment where you can learn the tools, where you can learn about the data, where the data is available in a lot of different senses to scientists all over the world. Okay, so what we're starting out with, now it's going backwards, okay? What we're starting out with is 5 people. We have downsized from a group of 30 now to a group of 5. Eva Paula is our executive director and is directly responsible for most of the actual business model. I am CFO and CTO. That's kind of glorified, but I'm basically in charge of mollifying the IRS and keeping us tax exempt so that we don't have to pay them large amounts of money. And I'm also responsible for getting all of these tools together and figuring out where we're going to be going. Tanya Berardini is the director of curation. One of the major things that we believe is essential to model organism databases is functional annotation. And one of the things that the NSF has persistently refused to fund is that kind of annotation. So we're going to fund it this way. And we're going to provide much of the value in the data longer term as functional annotation. Dongwei Li is Director of Product Marketing. He's also curator. He is going to be focusing on the subscription model in practice, in making it work for all of the different institutions. So in particular, he's trying to figure out how to map this model to China, which seems to have a really interesting institutional structure around their universities. They all share IP addresses and do all kinds of very strange things with their institutional structure. So that's our most challenging market, I think, to think about it that way. But that's also the market where we've seen the most interest in long-term sustainability. So we're working hard on that. Dongwei is working hard on that. Finally, David Huang is the senior software developer I have working for me. He's primarily responsible for making things happen these days, since I'm busy modifying IRS. So if you want to see more details about this, you can go to www.phoenixbioinformatics.org, and our website, www.rapidopsis.org, will continue. It's got a lot of news on it that describes exactly what we're trying to do, but most of the important stuff is on phoenixbioinformatics.org. So I just wanted to stress that this is a kind of brand new way of thinking about model organism databases and scientific resources in general. And it's kind of one we were forced into considering by the simple market forces we were being faced with. We felt that the resource was important enough to preserve and to grow. And this is, frankly, pretty much the only way we've found that has the potential for doing that. So when I wrote this presentation up about 3 or 4 months ago, we were just starting out on this. Our goal is to go live April 1st with this model for individuals. We've already gone live to some extent in the corporate community. So far, we have exceeded our projections in terms of uptake of the subscriptions. So at this point, we're well on track to coming in well above our revenue goals for this year and next year in terms of subscriptions. So I think from the way it's looking right now, it's working quite well. And we're very hopeful that it's going to work in the long term. So, thank you very much.
Interesting stuff. Questions for Bob?
Well, question for everyone. So you say you talked about a big platform for more than just the test system.
Right.
So say somebody was coming to the end of the grant funding, not necessarily Goodman from outside the US. What would be the plan to getting it into your system? Would there be some sort of fast track assistance of, we know we're not going to get refunded, but we've only got 2 months left sort of thing?
Right.
But then you've got a new system taken in. How are you going to manage the understanding, the knowledge of that system and how to work with it? Or are you just going to essentially have to take a developer from that team and pull them in because they know the system?
Yes. I mean, one of the things we realized was that a big part of the success at TAIR was the people at TAIR. And one of the things that I felt most strongly over the last 3 years as we ramped down due to the way the NSF had designed the last 4-year grant, I had to lay off most of my team. The consequence of laying off most of my team